This story you're about to hear is a story about my first time hitchhiking in Spain. I was probably 19 or 20 at the time, and it was my first time hitchhiking. Quite honestly, I didn't really know what to do. Of course, I'd seen movies and TV shows. It looked pretty straightforward. You just stand beside the highway and stick your thumb out, and people come pick you up, right? I bought some cigarettes and a cheap bottle of wine and began walking along the highway outside of Barcelona. I hadn't really expected to feel embarrassed about what I was doing, but I did. I felt like some American Euro trip cliche. Most cars whizzed by without even slowing down. Some people looked at me with what seemed like disdain, I guess. I thought about making a sign, but eventually decided against it. Someone threw a drink at me. I felt ridiculous. After 4 hours, I walked back to Barcelona. That night at a hostel, some drunk hanging out at the bar told me that I should be hitching much further outside the city, otherwise nobody would pick me up. The next morning, I decided to heed his advice and give it a try. I took a train to the highway far beyond Barcelona and stuck my thumb out. After about 10 minutes, a beat up little delivery van pulled over. The driver was wearing mirrored sunglasses and had a ponytail. I hopped in without asking where he was going. As I said, I was new. I didn't know the rules. The man didn't speak any English, but I thought if I repeated things loudly enough in Spanish that I would understand him. The van smelled like blonde tobacco and hair oil. In the back, a couple of stale bread loaves were sitting around. It was a bread delivery truck, apparently. The man kept on talking to me, annoyed that I wasn't responding, but after a while he gave up and turned on the radio. I had no idea where we were going, and I never felt so uncomfortable in my life. After about 10 minutes, he pulled over and took out a pocket knife and a bar of hash and began shaving a piece of the hash off. I'd never seen hash before and asked him what it was. Chocolate, he told me. He rolled a joint and lit it, and we got back on the highway. We passed the joint back and forth. When it was finished, he threw it out the window, turned the music back up, and began driving extremely fast, honking, swerving around cars, just driving crazy. At times he would yell things out the window or at me. He was obviously crazy, but I didn't care. I was high. 30 minutes later, he pulled over, said some things in a tone that sounded like advice, then just sat there. When I didn't do anything, he unlocked the door and nodded towards it. I got out and he drove off. I had no idea where I was. I ate some cheese, I drank some wine, sat on the side of the road and stuck my thumb out some more. After about 30 minutes, a car pulled over, but when I grabbed my pack and hurried towards it, it screeched off with middle fingers thrust out the window. I walked for what seemed like hours. It probably wasn't much longer than 30 or 40 minutes, taking a swig of wine from time to time. The weather was beautiful. It was sunny. Birds were out chirping. I was stoned. I walked until I came upon a gas station, went a little beyond it, and stuck my thumb out again. 8 hours went by, no ride. Occasionally, the station attendant came out and stared at me. He didn't wave or say anything, he just stared. When I waved back, he'd go back inside. When the sun went down, the temperature fell, and I had to put on every layer of clothing that I owned, everything in my pack. I jumped up and down to keep warm. I clapped my hands, blew in them. I sang songs until my throat was dry. I did jumping jacks. Nothing worked. My hands felt like bars of ice. I convinced myself that I was developing a fever and that if I didn't get out of there soon, I would freeze to death. I began frantically waving at cars, and when that didn't work, I went to the station and began asking those who pulled over for gas to take me with them. Some pretended like they didn't speak English. Others looked at my beard and my mangy hair and said, "Sorry, I can't help you," and drove away. It was the coldest night of my life. Around midnight, the cars stopped coming. I had no food, no water, no money, nowhere to sleep. I just sat down in the middle of the highway to smoke my last cigarette. Just as I finished, a pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and a truck they belonged to materialized and veered over towards the diesel pumps. I grabbed my pack and ran like a madman. The driver was African and seemed in a hurry. I slowed down and approached him cautiously. I asked him, "Where are you going?" He jumped. He hadn't seen me creep up. "France," I said. He said something in French. French. France? Montpellier? France? I pointed to the truck. "Can I go with you?" I made little hand movements to try to communicate this, but he shook his head no and walked into the station. When he came out, I was standing on the side of his truck. Please, I begged. "You must take me. I'm stranded here." He got into his truck and started the engine. I looked at him through the window, trying to make the saddest face possible, like a puppy in a pet shop window. He seemed to be struggling with himself in there. I tapped the glass and mouthed, "Please?" He reached over and unlocked the door and made room for me in the seat. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you so much." He didn't understand English. He offered me some coffee and donuts, and we drove off into the darkness towards France.